Right, children. Even in this chapter, we are going to learn about electronic components. Do you remember what are the electronic components we learned so far? We learned about LEDs and diodes. Now, LED means light emitting diodes. It's also a type of diodes. So here we are going to learn about resistors. What is the meaning of resistors, children? Before we learn about resistors, we have to learn about resistance. We'll go through this. There's a loss of current when lengthy electric wires are used in circuits. Lengthy electric wires, which means long wires. Okay? That is because of the barrier to the flow of current. What are these words? Barrier to the flow of current. That is because of the barrier to the flow of current in the conductor, which is known as the resistance. Right. So what is resistance, children? Remember, even though we can't see, when an electric current flows through the circuit, there's always a barrier, a disturbance towards the flow of the electric current, and this is known as resistance. Right, children? So the amount of resistance in a certain circuit depends on different factors. Length of the conductor is one factor. Right, children? Look at this one again. There's a loss of current when lengthy electric wires are used in circuits. So you all know that when we make circuits, if I draw like this with a dry cell and connective wire, we can make a circuit like this. So if you connect a bulb like this, so this is a circuit. Okay, children? So this is a closed circuit. Electricity flows through this circuit from positive to negative terminal of the cell through the circuit. Right, children? So this is the cell, this is a bulb, these are connective wires. Okay, so far we learned about how to make circuits. Therefore, now you have an idea what are these connective wires. So what happens according to these children? When the length of the wires increase, right? When the length of the conductors or the wires increase, resistance increases, children. Okay, so what is the resistance again? Resistance means there's a certain barrier towards the flow of electricity in a certain circuit. This is known as the resistance of the circuit. Right? This resistance or this barrier towards the electric flow depends on different factors. Right? So one of those factors is the length of the conductors. Here in this case, length of the wires. Okay? So when the length of the wire increases, the resistance or the barrier towards the electric current also increases. So if there's a barrier towards the flow of electricity, what happens to the amount of electricity flows through the circuit, children? When there's a barrier, the amount of electricity flows through the circuit reduces. Okay, children? So what should happen when we increase the length of these wires more and more? The resistance increases. When the resistance increases, what should happen, children? Resistance means a certain type of barrier towards the flow of electricity. When the resistance or the barrier increases, the amount of electric current flows through the circuit reduces. Right, children? So resistors are used to control the current flows through a circuit. This is another one, resistors. Now in this part we are going to learn about resistors as a component that we fix to circuits. Okay, so resistors are used to control the current flows through a circuit. So in different instances, when we make different types of circuits, sometimes we have to control the amount of electricity flows through the circuit. In that case, we can use these small devices with different amounts of resistance. Right? So these devices with different amounts of resistance are known as resistors. So to understand better about these resistors, we are going to do an activity now, right? So the activity is observing the change of resistance of a circuit. What is the resistance again? The barrier towards the flow of electricity is known as the resistance. Okay, children? So, observing the change of resistance of a circuit. So, what do we need to do this activity? We need dry cells, connective wire, an LED. Now, these are carbon rods. We need carbon rods, right? And we need a switch. We will write dry cells, connective wire, LED, light emitting diode, carbon rods, switch. Okay, let's see how to do this activity. Right, method. Look at the diagram. We will label this first. These are dry cells, connective wire, switch, carbon rods, and the LED. LED, switch, and carbon rods. Carbon rods. Okay, children? Right, so how to do this activity? Prepare the circuit as shown in the figure. So what we have to do is, first of all, we have to make the circuit like this. When we do this activity, first of all, we can do this activity. We can connect the circuit without the carbon rods, right? Only the connective wire, and we have to check the brightness of the LED. Then we have to connect one carbon rod to this circuit. Right, between A and B, you have to connect one carbon rod, and then you have to check what happens to the brightness of the LED, right? Then the next instance, you have to connect two carbon rods in the same line, right? Between A and B, you have to connect two carbon rods, and this time also you have to check what happens to the brightness of the LED, okay? So prepare the circuit as shown in the figure. First, keep one carbon rod between A and B. So even without any carbon rod, we can do this activity too, right? Observe the brightness of the bulb. Then increase the number of carbon rods and repeat the experiment. So what we have to do is, when we increase the number of carbon rods, we have to check what happens to the brightness of this LED, okay? Discuss the reasons for your observations with your friends. So we'll do this activity first. Right, children. Now we are going to learn about the electric resistance. So to learn about electric resistance, we have to do this simple activity. Look at the circuit that I have prepared, children. Can you all see? I have made this battery using two dry cells. Okay. Now this is the positive terminal and the negative terminal. I have connected the bulb like this, and from this side a switch. Okay. I am going to close the switch like this, and then I am going to connect these two ends. You all can see the bulb lights up. Look at the brightness, children. Now I am going to increase the length of this circuit, length of the conductors, by adding the carbon rods. Now look at this one. This is a carbon rod. Okay. Now I am going to connect this wire from this side, and then I am going to connect this side, keep this side at the end of this carbon rod. Now when I keep this end, you all know that the length increases. Earlier it ended from here. Look what happens to the brightness. Again I will show you. I will keep it from here. Look at the brightness of the bulb. And when I keep it at the end of the carbon rod, check what happens to the brightness. You all can see the brightness reduces slightly. Okay. Now I'm going to add another carbon rod. By adding another carbon rod, I'm going to increase the length more. Right? What happens, children? The brightness is less than before. Initially, when carbon rods are not there, when I keep this wire here, the brightness is high. When I keep at the end of this wire, the brightness again is there, but a little less than before. When I keep at the end of this, the first carbon rod, brightness is more or less reduces. And when we keep this wire at the end of two carbon rods, it reduces more and more. Why does this happen, children? Remember, children, when there's flow of electricity goes through a circuit, there's always a barrier towards this flow of electricity. This is known as the electric resistance. Understand, children? Now this electric resistance increases with the length of the conductors. Now here, earlier, when we don't use these two carbon rods and we use only these wires, the length of the conductors is less, right? When we use two carbon rods, the length of the conductors increases. Thereby, when the length of the conductors increases, what happens to the resistance? Resistance also increases. When the resistance increases, what happens to the flow of electricity, children? The flow of electricity reduces. Understand, when the length of the conductor is less, the resistance is also less. When the resistance is less, resistance means the barrier towards the flow of electricity. So when the barrier towards the flow of electricity reduces, more electric current flows through the circuit and therefore more electric current flows through the bulb and the brightness is higher. So when we accordingly increase the length of the conductors, what happens, children? Resistance also increases. Now you all know the resistance means the barrier towards the electric flow, the flow of electricity. So then what happens when the barrier or the resistance increases? The flow of electricity through the circuit reduces. That is why, because of less amount of electricity flows through the bulb, the brightness of the bulb reduces. Right, children. So you observed what happened when we were doing the activity. We'll go to the method again. So what we did was we made the circuit like this, and when we increase the number of carbon rods, what happened to the brightness of the bulb, children? When the number of carbon rods connected to the circuit increases. The brightness of the LED decreases. Right? Which means when the length of the circuit or when the length of the conductors increases, the brightness of the bulb decreases. Okay? We'll go back. Here, when there are no carbon rods, the length of the conductors less, right? Reduced. By increasing the number of carbon rods between A and B, you can increase the length of the conductors. So what happens by increasing the number of carbon rods? LED, the brightness of the LED reduces, which means when the length of the conductors increase, the brightness of the bulb reduces. Okay? We'll write that as well. We'll write it within brackets. When the length of the path of the current. Path of the current. Increases the brightness of LED, of the LED decreases. Okay, so what is this length of the path of the current? Look at this one again. So the current flows through the circuit from the positive terminal towards the circuit to the negative terminal of the cell, right? So what happens when you increase the number of carbon rods connected to the circuit? The path of the flow of current increases. Okay, so when you increase the length of the path of the current, what happens? The brightness of the LED decreases. Okay, right. When the number of carbon rods connected to the circuit increases, the brightness of the LED decreases, right? Which means when the length of the path of the current increases, the brightness of the LED decreases. Why does this happen, children? Even during the activity I explained y'all. What happens when the length of the conductor, when the length of the path of the current increases, what happens to the resistance? Now, resistance means the barrier towards the flow of electricity. Right, children? So what happens when the length of the path of the flow of electricity increases? The resistance or the barrier also increases. So when the resistor increases, what happens to the amount of current flows through the circuit, children? Reduces. When there's more disturbance, more barrier, electricity cannot flow easily. Therefore, the amount of electric current flows through the circuit reduces. Right? So in order to light the bulb with high brightness, there should be more electric current flow through the LED. Okay? So when more amount of current flows through the LED, it lights up brightly. The brightness is very high. But when you increase the number of carbon rods, what happens to the path? The length of the path increases. At the same time, resistance also increases. Right? When the resistance increases, what happens? The amount of electric current flows reduces, which means the amount of current passes through this LED also reduces. Therefore, the brightness reduces. Understand? We will write this. So, we will write the conclusion. When the length of the conductor increases, the resistance also increases. When the resistance increases, the amount of electric current flows through the circuit decreases. Right, children? When the length of the conductor increases, right? When the length increases, the resistance also increases. the resistance also increases. Right, children? When the resistance increases, the amount of electric current flows through the circuit decreases. Right? So when the amount of current flows through the circuit decreases, this is a reason for the less brightness of the bulb, okay? We'll write that within brackets. Therefore, the brightness of the LED decreases. Understand, children? When the length of the conductor increases, the resistance also increases. When the resistance increases, the amount of electric current flows through the circuit decreases. Okay? Therefore, the brightness of the LED decreases. So after doing this activity, I hope you understood what is resistance. Resistance means the barrier towards the flow of electric current towards a circuit. Okay? So this resistance changes from time to time, right, based on different factors. So I hope you understood that length affects the resistance. Length of the conductor affects the resistance. Okay. So when the length of the conductor of a certain circuit increases, which means the length of the wire increases, what happens, children? The resistance increases. When the resistance increases, the amount of electric current flows through the circuit decreases. Understand, children? We'll move on to the next. So the barrier to the flow of current is called electric resistance. Okay. So the barrier to the flow of current is called electric resistance. How to measure this resistance? The unit used to measure electric resistance is ohm. Look at this symbol. Right? This symbol is called omega. Right? Ohm. Right? A device having resistance to the passage of an electric current is called a resistor. So in this chapter, we are going to learn about electronic components. So one such electronic component is resistors. So in order to learn about resistors, first you should know what resistance is. So resistance means the barrier to the flow of current is called electric resistance. It is measured in ohm. So whenever we want to control the amount of electric current flows through the circuit, we can connect these small devices called resistors. Right, children? There are different types of resistors. We are going to learn them under this chapter. Right? So a device having resistance to the passage of an electric current is called a resistor. Right? You can buy resistors of different values from the market. Okay? So there are different types of resistance with different values. Okay? So we'll do the next activity. We have to do another activity, connecting different resistors to a circuit. Okay? So look at these pictures. Even in the lab, I'm going to show you all. We need different values of resistors, right? So we need resistors with different values to do this activity, right? So there are different types of resistors and we need a small bulb, we need dry cells and switch. Okay? Right. We'll write. Resistors of different values. Small bulb, dry cells, switch. Okay, we need resistors of different values, small bulb, dry cells and a switch. Okay, how to do this activity? We have to prepare the circuit like this. Let's label this. Dry cells, switch, bulb, connective wire. dry cells. Switch. This is a small bulb. And connective wire. Okay, so when you prepare this circuit, you have to leave a gap like this, AB. Okay, prepare the circuit as shown in the figure. Keep resistors one at a time between A and B and continue the experiment. What we have to do is, we have to keep different types of resistors in between A and B. I told you that we need resistors of different values. Okay, and you have to check what happens to the brightness of the bulb. Okay, observe the brightness of the bulb, discuss the reason for your observations. We'll do this activity now. Right, children, now we are going to learn how to change the resistance of different circuits. Okay, now what is the resistance again, children? Resistance means barrier towards the flow of electric current. I explained y'all that when we consider a circuit, there's always a barrier towards the flow of electricity, and this is known as resistance. And in the earlier experiment, we learned that this barrier or the resistance increase with the length of the electric conductors. Okay, children? And there are components called resistors. What is a resistor, children? Sometimes when we make different types of circuits, there are instances that we need to increase and decrease the resistance or the barrier towards the flow of electricity. So in that case, we have to connect these small components called resistors. Resistors are the components with different types of different amounts of resistance. Now, do you remember we learned that to measure the resistance of a conductor, we use the unit called ohm, right? So when the resistance increases, the barrier towards the flow of electricity also increases and the flow of electricity reduces. Okay, children? Now, look at this carefully, children. These are called resistors. I told you the different components with different types of resistance, different amounts of resistance are known as resistors. Look at this. If you observe carefully, you can see this tiny component has different colored lines. Actually, these lines indicate what the resistance is, the amount of resistance is, okay? Right. And to do this activity, we need different amounts of resistors, okay? Now here I have used 3 different types of resistors, 5 ohm, 10 ohm, you all can see, and 20 ohm resistor. Now I showed you this is the resistor. What about this, children? I will open this and show you. This is actually a type of holder to connect this resistor. This type of tiny component is connected here. Right, children? Right. So first of all, I am going to show you this small circuit. Look at this one. There's a battery, a bulb and a switch. It is connected. This battery is connected to the bulb and I am going to close the switch now. Look at the bulb and look at the brightness of the bulb. Right, you can see it has a high brightness. And now I am going to close the switch and I am going to remove this one and I am going to connect this 5 ohm, the smallest resistor, the 5 ohm resistor to this circuit. Right. Observe carefully. And I am going to close the switch again. This time you can see the brightness is little less. Why does this happen, children? Because earlier there was no any additional resistor. Now this time we connected 5 ohm resistor. Therefore, the resistor means barrier towards the flow of electricity. When we connect the resistor, because the barrier increases, the flow of electricity reduces. Therefore, the flow of electricity flows through this circuit reduces and That's why the brightness is little less than before. Okay. Now I'm going to remove this 5 ohm resistor and I'm going to connect this 10 ohm resistor, which means now earlier 5 ohm, this time 10 ohms, higher than before. The resistance is higher than before, right? Look what happens to the brightness again. What happens, children? The brightness is less than the second instance as well. Okay. Why does this happen, children? Now initially the brightness was very high. That is because no resistors, no extra resistance was connected to the circuit. Right? In the first instance we connected the 5 ohm resistor and the second instance we connected the 10 ohms resistor. Right? So gradually we increase the resistance and thereby we can see the brightness of the bulb reduces. Right? And finally, I am going to connect this 20 ohms resistor. Look what happens to the brightness this time, children. It is very, very less. Right, children? That is because the resistor we connected this time is of 20 ohms. Higher than the first two instances. Okay, children? So it's very clear when the type of resistor we connect, let's say the resistance increases, what happens? The barrier towards the flow of electricity increases. When the barrier towards the flow of electricity increases, what happens to the electricity? The amount of electricity flows through the circuit, children. It reduces, right? So then what happens? Each time when the amount of electricity flows through this bulb reduces, the brightness of the bulb reduces. I hope this experiment is clear now. Right. So you observed what happened. So how did we do this activity again? We made the circuit like this, and when we connected different resistors with different values in between A and B, what happened? At different instances, the brightness of the bulb is different. So when the value of the resistor is higher, what happens to the brightness of the bulb, children? It is lower, right? When the resistance is less, the brightness is high. Okay, so why does this happen again? Even in the previous activity we discussed, when the value of the resistor increases means the resistance or the barrier towards the electric flow also increases. When the value increases, the resistance also increases. When the resistance increases, what happens to the flow of electric current? The amount of electric current flows through the circuit reduces. When the amount of electric current flows through the circuit reduces, accordingly, the brightness of the bulb also reduces. Understand? We'll write. Observation. When the value of the resistors connected to the circuit increases, the brightness of the bulb decreases. So how to write the conclusion, children? When the brightness increases, which means more amount of electric current flows through the circuit, which means the resistance is less. Therefore, we can come to a conclusion that when the resistance increases, the amount of current flows through the circuit reduces. Okay? Let's write. The brightness of the bulb increases with increased amount of electric current flows through it. Flows through it. So what was the observation, children? Our observation was when we increase the value of the resistors, the brightness of the bulb reduces, which means less amount of electric current flows through it. Okay, let's write. Therefore, the current flows through the circuit reduces with increased resistance. With increased resistance. Okay, the brightness of the bulb increases with increased amount of electric current flows through it. Therefore, the current flows through the circuit reduces with increased resistance. Okay, which means we can write within brackets increased value of resistors or higher value of resistors. So what happens when the value of the resistor increases, which means the resistance or the barrier towards the flow of electricity also increases. When the barrier towards the flow of electricity increases, less amount of current flows through the circuit and therefore brightness of the bulb reduces. Understand? Let's move on to the next. So there are various types of resistors with different shapes in the market. So even in the lab I showed you all different types of resistors are there, right? Look at these resistors. You all can see there are colorful bands present here, right? Different colored bands present in different types of resistors. So what are these bands for? These are for the permanent value of these resistors. So the value of the resistor and some other details also indicated by these different colorful bands. Okay. So different types of resistors with different shapes in the market. Okay. What are the different types of resistors, children? Some of these are fixed resistors. The value is a fixed value. We can't change it. Okay. These are known as permanent resistors. And some of the resistors, the values can be changed. These are known as variable resistors. Okay. So another type of resistor is there that is known as light sensitive resistors. Okay. So light sensitive resistors, the resistors changes with the amount of light falls on the resistor. Okay. Let's write this. Permanent resistor. Permanent resistors. So the permanent resistors means you can't change the value of the resistor. It is a fixed value. These type of permanent resistors we use for the previous activity. The value cannot be changed. Right? Number 2, variable resistors. Variable resistors. There the value can be changed. The value can be changed. Okay. Number 3. Light sensitive resistors. They are the resistance depends on the amount of light falls on the resistor. Okay. Permanent resistors, the value cannot be changed. Variable resistors, the value can be changed. Light sensitive resistors, the resistance depends on the amount of light falls on the resistor. So in this diagram, different types of permanent resistors are given. Okay children, so on the permanent resistors, you can see these type of colorful bands. These bands indicate the value and other details as well. When you go to the upper grades, you are going to learn more about these type of resistors. Okay? Right. So the standard symbol of resistors, to indicate resistors, what is the circuit symbol that we can use? Look carefully. Right. Look at this. Let's see how to draw. There are 2 ways to draw the symbol of resistors. So this is one method of drawing the symbol of resistors. There's another method as well, children. Let's see. There you can draw a rectangle like this. 2 lines connected like this, and then we can write R for resistors. Even without R, in some books you will see that even without R, just this rectangle with 2 lines like this. Okay, so there are 2 methods of drawing the symbol of resistors. Either way is correct. Understand children? We'll move on to the next. For your extra knowledge parts also important. We'll go through this one. In the laboratory for different experiments, we need to change the current flowing through a circuit. Rheostat, this is the rheostat. Rheostat is a kind of variable resistor. Now you all know that there are 3 different types of resistors. Some resistors are permanent, the value is permanent, you can't change the value. And some resistors you can change the resistance. Okay, these are known as variable resistors. There are different types of variable resistors. Rheostat that we use in the lab is one such type. Okay, so rheostat is a kind of variable resistor which helps to change the resistance. So about the rheostat, in the upper grades you are going to do a lot of experiments with this rheostat. Okay children, so rheostat is a type of variable resistor. So you can change the resistance of the circuit using these type of rheostats connected. Okay children, we'll move on to the next. Light dependent resistors or LDR. So this is also an electronic component. This component used to make different types of electronic circuits. Okay. So LDR, light dependent resistor. LDR. So what is the meaning of this LDR children? This is a type of resistor. It's a light sensitive resistor. Do you remember we learned 3 different types of resistors are there? Permanent resistors, variable resistors and light sensitive resistors. So this is light dependent resistor is a type of light sensitive resistor. Okay. Right. So the activity, we are going to study the function of an LDR. So what are the things we need? We need a light dependent resistor or an LDR. And we need an LED, dry cells, connective wire, a switch and a milliammeter. So why do we use the milliammeter, children? We can use the milliammeter to measure the electric current flows through the circuit, the small electric current, okay? I'll write in short form, LDR, light dependent resistor, LED. Now LED is a type of diode, light emitting diode. Dry cells, connective wire, we need a switch and a milliammeter. Okay, LDR, LED, dry cells, connective wire, switch and a milliammeter. How to do the activity? Let's see. Right, look at the circuit. You have to make the circuit like this. Let's label the diagram, children. We need dry cells, switch, connective wire. This is the LDR, light dependent resistor and milliammeter. Dry cells, connective wire, switch, LDR, milliammeter. Okay, so you have to prepare the circuit as given in this figure diagram. Okay, so how to do this? Switch it on and you have to check what happens. So when you prepare the circuit like this and when you close the switch, you will see this milliammeter indicator moves or deflects, which means when you close the switch, electric current flows through the circuit. Okay, next one, expose the LDR to the sunlight. So if there's no sunlight, we can direct torchlight to this LDR. And then you have to check what happens to the indicator of the milliammeter, whether it increases or whether it decreases or whether it remains at the same place. Okay. So next one, expose the LDR to the sunlight, get the reading of the milliammeter. Then cover the LDR with your hand and get the reading again. Right? You have to cover the LDR. LDR is a small device. You have to cover it with, and then you have to check what happens to the milliammeter indicator. Right? And repeat the experiment by using an LED instead of the milliammeter. So how to do this again? First of all, you have to set the apparatus like this, set the circuit like this, and when you close the switch, you are going to observe a certain reading of the milliammeter indicator. Right? Then you are going to direct torchlight towards this LDR, right? And then you have to check what happens to the milliammeter indicator. Then the next instance you have to cover the LDR, close it with your hand and check what happens to the millimeter indicator. Understand? Then you are going to do the same activity without the millimeter. Instead of the millimeter, in between these two ends, you are going to connect the LED or light emitting diode. So each instance, you are going to check what's happening to the brightness of the LED. We'll do this activity now. Right, children. Now we are going to do this activity to understand the function of an LDR. So what is an LDR, children? LDR means light dependent resistors. So these type of resistors can increase and decrease the resistance based on the amount of light falls on that. Okay, children? So can you all see the circuit? I have made this circuit with a milliammeter. You all can see this is a milliammeter. Here we have 2 dry cells and a switch. And now this is our LDR. Observe carefully. Can you all see the LDR? This is the LDR. So you all can see where the indicator of the ammeter is at the moment. It is at 0. You all know that the indicator moves only when electricity passes through this circuit. Okay. So at the moment the switch is open. That's why this indicator is at 0. So I'm going to close the switch. Observe what happens. You can see the indicator of the ammeter moves, which means at this point electricity passes through the circuit. Right. Now I'm going to direct torchlight onto this LDR. I'm going to turn on this, switch on this torch. So you all can see this is the LDR. When I direct this torchlight to the LDR, you have to observe the ammeter indicator. Okay, children? So you all can see intensity of light. By taking the torch closer to the LDR, I am going to increase the intensity of light. Now at this moment, there's no extra light, additional light. You all can see where the indicator is. Observe carefully what happens when I direct this light little by little. You can see the indicator moves more. So observe carefully what happens when I bring the torch close to the LDR. So you all can see the indicator gradually increases. Right? Right. So at this moment you can see the indicator moves more and more away from 0. Right. So why does this happen, children? You all know that when the indicator moves more means that happens when more electric current flows through the milliammeter. Okay, children? So when I directed this torchlight onto this LDR, what happens, children? More electric current flows through the circuit. Why does that happen, children? This is a type of resistor. Resistor has a certain resistance. Right, children? So this LDR, this light dependent resistor, what happens when we direct torchlight with high intensity of light, its resistance decreases, right? Its resistance decreases, so reduces. So if less amount of resistance present in a certain circuit, more electric current passes through the circuit. So when more amount of electric current passes through this, accordingly, ammeter reading also increases. Okay, children? Now see what happens. You all can see. Now again this indicators at where it was at the beginning, right? So I am going to cover this LDR. Check what happens. When I cover this LDR, you can see the ammeter indicator reduces, right? If I direct torchlight and if I cover it, you will observe it very clearly. Now you all can see where the indicator is. So the LDR gets high intensity of light. Now I am going to cover this one. You can see the indicator or the ammeter reading decreases. Right? With light, when I cover that one. Again with light, without light. So it's clear that with the intensity of light, the resistance of this LDR is also increases and decreases. With more light, its resistance reduces. With less amount of light, its resistance increases. Right, children? Okay. Now I'm going to do this activity with an LED. So therefore, I'm going to remove this milliammeter and I'm going to connect a LED bulb to this circuit. So you all know that when we connect the LED bulb, the positive and negative terminals of the bulb should be connected properly, correctly, right? So you all know how to find out the positive and negative terminals of the LED. You can see this longer terminal is the positive terminal, shorter one is the negative terminal, right? So you all can see this is the positive terminal of the dry cell. So I'm going to connect this LED's positive terminal to the dry cell's positive terminal. Right? What happens, children? The bulb lights up, the bulb illuminates. Right? You can see there's a certain brightness to this bulb. Okay? Right. Now we are going to check what happens to the brightness of this LED with the change of resistance of this LDR. Now you all know that LDR can change its resistance with the amount of light falls onto that, right? You can see the brightness of the bulb increases. Right. When I take it out again, it's the same brightness. Right. Now this time the brightness increases again. Right? You can see it clearly. Right, children? Now I'm going to direct this torch light onto the LDR and then you have to check what happens to the brightness of the bulb, okay? Watch carefully. Can you see the brightness of the bulb increased? When I take the torch away, you can see the brightness reduces again. This time again the brightness increases. Right, it's very clear the brightness of the bulb increase with high intensity of light on LDR and under normal condition the brightness reduced. Right, what will happen if I cover this LDR? You have to observe what happens to the brightness. I am going to cover the LDR with my finger. You can see the brightness reduces this time. Right, increased, reduced, increased, reduced. Right. So what is the reason for these observations, children? You all know that when more amount of electric current flows through the circuit, the brightness of the LED increases. When less amount of electric current flows through the circuit, the brightness reduces. So because of the change of the resistance of this LDR, this brightness increase and decrease is observed, children. So when I direct the torch light, the brightness of the bulb increases. Why does that happen? Because when I direct torch light onto the LDR, the resistance of the LDR reduces. So when the resistance of an LDR or any other resistor reduces, what happens, children? The amount of electric current flows through the circuit increases. Right? So when more amount of electric current flows through the LED, what happens, children? The brightness increases. So in the same way, when I cover the LED, what happens to the resistance, children? The resistance increases. When the resistance increases, what happens to the amount of current flows through the circuit? Decreases. So when the amount of electricity flows through this LED decreases, the brightness also reduces, children. So this is how an LDR functions. Right. So you observed what happened, children. This was a very interesting experiment, right? So what did we observe? So first of all, when we connected the milliammeter indicator and when we directed torch light, what happened to the milliammeter reading, children? The milliammeter reading increases, right? So you all know if the milliammeter reading increases than it was before, which means more amount of electric current flows through the circuit. Right, children? So when you cover the LDR, what happens, children? The milliammeter reading decreases, which means the amount of electric current flows through the circuit reduces. Okay, children. So in the same way, you observed what happened when we connected the LED to the circuit. So when we directed torchlight onto this LDR, what happened to the brightness of the LED? It increases. So the brightness of the LED increases again when more electric current flows through the circuit, right? So what happened when we covered the LDR with our hand? What happened to the brightness of the LED? It decreases, which means the amount of current flows through the LED reduces. Right, children? So each instance, when we direct torch light onto this LDR, milliammeter indicator increases, the brightness of the LED connected also increases, right? Both the observations possible only if more electric current passes through the circuit, which means when we direct torchlight onto this LDR, more electric current flows through this circuit, right? So LDR means light depending resistor. It is a type of resistor. So what happens to the resistance when we direct torchlight onto these children? The resistance reduces. What is the resistance again? Resistance means the barrier towards an electric current. If the resistance is increased, what happens to the amount of electricity passes through the circuit, children? It reduces, right? But this time, the amount of electric current increases. That is why the milliammeter indicator increases, or the milliammeter reading increases, and the brightness of the LED also increases, right? So we can come to a conclusion when we direct torch light onto the LDR, which means with high intensity of light, what happens to the resistance of the LDR? Reduces. Resistance reduces means more electric current passes through the circuit. Therefore, the milliammeter reading increases and the brightness of the LED also increases. In the same way, when we cover the LDR, what happens, children? The milliammeter reading reduces, the brightness of the LED also reduces. So these two observations possible when less amount of electric current flows through the circuit, right? Which means when we cover the LDR, when it does not get enough light, what happens? The amount of electric current flows through the circuit reduces. Why does this happen? Because when this LDR doesn't get enough light, its resistance increases. When the resistance increases, what happens to the flow of electricity through a current, children? It reduces, right? Because of the reduction of current, the milliammeter reading reduces, and at the same time, the brightness of the bulb also reduces. Let's write the observations. Observation: when light falls on LDR, the milliammeter reading and the brightness of the LED increases. When the LDR is covered, milliammeter reading and the brightness of the LED decreases. Okay, children? When light falls on LDR, the milliammeter reading and the brightness of the LED increases, right? When the LDR is covered, the milliammeter reading and the brightness of the LED decreases, right? So how to write the conclusion? So in the first instance, we'll write as 2 points here. In the first instance, the milliammeter reading and the brightness of the LED increases with more amount of electric current. Therefore, we can come to a conclusion that, so what happens when light falls on LDR? Its resistance reduces, which means more amount of electric current flows through the circuit, right? So in the second instance, what happens when the LDR does not get light, which means the LDR is covered? What happens, children? The amount of electric current flows through the circuit reduces. That is why the milliammeter reading and the brightness of the LED both decreases, right? Which means the resistance of the LDR increases, right? Let's write. When light falls on LDR, its resistance reduces, right? Decreases. When the LDR is covered, which means when it doesn't get light, when it is at dark. When the LDR is covered, we can write within brackets, when the intensity of light falls on the LDR, reduces. What happens to the resistance? Its resistance increases. Okay, children? When light falls on LDR, its resistance decreases, right? When the LDR is covered, or when the intensity of light falls on the LDR reduces, what happens? Its resistance increases. This is very important, children. Right? We'll underline. When light falls on LDR, its resistance decreases. Right? When the LDR is covered, when the intensity of light reduces, its resistance increases. Understand, children? So I hope you understood the function of the LDR. We'll move on to the next. When light falls on LDR, a high current flows through the circuit. By shading the light, the flow of current through the circuit reduces gradually. Can you suggest the reason for this? This is the same thing we wrote here, children. Right? So the question asks, when light falls on LDR, high current flows through the circuit. What is the reason? So what happens when light falls on LDR? The barrier towards the electric current reduces, which means more amount of electric current can flow through the circuit. Right, children? We'll write that one. When light falls on LDR, its resistance decreases. We can write the same thing because it's the same reason we have to write. Right? Okay, it's right. When light falls on LDR, high current flows through the circuit. What is the reason? When light falls on LDR, its resistance decreases. Right? When light falls on LDR, a high current flows through the circuit because when light falls on LDR, its resistance decreases. That's why high current. The second one, by shading the light, the flow of current through the circuit reduces gradually. We observed it very clearly during the experiment, right? So what is the reason? When the intensity of light falls on the LDR, reduces its resistance, increases. By shading the light, the flow of current through the circuit reduces gradually. Why? Because when the intensity of light falls on the LDR reduces, what happens to the resistance? Its resistance increases. Right? This is the reason for these observations. Understand, children? Right. Therefore, light-dependent resistors, or LDR, are resistors that change based on the amount of light falling on it. They are sensitive towards light. Understand? Right. So then we have to draw the standard symbol of LDR, right? We'll draw this one. Again, we can draw two circuit symbols. So first one you can draw like this. So you are going to draw the same symbol you drew for the normal resistor inside the circle. And you have to draw two arrows like this. Look at this one. Right? So these two arrows indicate light falling on LDR. Right? This is the LDR. So light falling on it is indicated by the two arrows. Right? So you can draw it in a different way too. Right. You can understand that this is this rectangle with two lines. It was the same symbol. The second symbol we drew for resistors. Now this time you have to draw it inside a circle like this, right? In some books and some articles you will see capital R is also mentioned here, with or without, correct, okay? And you have to draw two arrows, inward arrows like this. So again, these two arrows indicate the light falls on the LDR. Okay, children? These both can be used to indicate LDR in circuit symbols. Understand? Right. Now we have completed this chapter as well. So in this chapter also we learn about different types of electronic components, right? And how to use them and what are the symbols of them as well. We are going to move to the next chapter now.